in contractors getting their claims across to employers, owners, and the like. So what I want to cover tonight, the topics I want to cover are, firstly, well, why a movie? You know, it's not been done before, really. So why now? Secondly, what do you need if you're going to be making a movie? So the sort of information and the elements that you need to put in to feed a movie. Then I'm going to basically go a little bit through what is involved. What is the process? How do we do this? And then, as you all know, blockbusters take a long time, but how long does a claim movie take? So how long will it take you to actually get that movie to its audience? Right, so the first thing there I want to talk about there is, well, why a movie? Well, all of us in the construction industry are very, very familiar with what a traditional claim document looks like. It'll basically be lots and lots of paper, huge amounts of text that you have to wade through. It'll be supported by huge numbers of appendices, also masses of paper. And generally speaking, it'll be written in a complex legalese type of inaccessible language, which means that being as it's using the written word and this sort of language, it can be limited by, firstly, what the meaning of those words are and how people use them, and also by the vocabulary of the writer and the reader who is trying to get his message across. Now, couple that with the fact that today people don't have a lot of time on their hands. These sort of things are very time-consuming to read. I want to give a bit of background now. So this is probably something you may be aware of or may not be, but in the year 2000, the average attention span of the average adult was 12 seconds. Now, that has actually diminished now because as of 2015, it was 8.25 seconds. So you've got to catch people. You've got to keep their attention. So you've already lost attention from what I'm saying because it's been over 8.25 seconds. Now, to further put that into context, the average reading speed of an average adult is about 230 words per minute, which will be roughly about half a page of A4. When you think that an average claim, certainly the sort of claims that I'm producing, will come to around about 40,000 words, then that means it's going to take you about 3 hours just to read the claim. That's without lining it, highlighting it, analyzing what's in there. So average attention span, 8.24 seconds, 3 hours to read a claim. It kind of puts it into perspective. Something that is also true is that 90% of the information that the brain takes in is visual. We live in a very visual dimension. And it's also true that the brain will process images 60,000 times faster than it will actually process text. Plus, an image doesn't lie, whereas text is open to interpretation. Now, I'm going to give you a quote here because people always say that Shakespeare said a picture paints 1,000 words. Well, actually, this is something that a little bit of trivia for you. It actually comes from Henrik Ibsen, famous Scandinavian poet. He said, 1,000 words leave not the same deep impression as does a single deed, which was taken by a man called Arthur Brisbane, who was an advertising executive in America, in the USA. And in March 1911, at the Syracuse Advertising Gentleman's Banquet, he said, use a picture, it's worth 1,000 words. Okay, it may have been misquoted, but it is very true. Just to add emphasis to that, in 2010, Forbes magazine did a survey where it was found that the majority of executives, if they were given the choice of watching a movie or video or presentation on a topic as opposed to reading that in text, 59% of them said that they would watch the video first. So that kind of sets the ground to how the sort of audience will perceive your message And certainly if you've got a large claim document that you're putting towards the client. Now, what about claims themselves? Well, generally speaking, claims can be boiled down to fairly simple stories. And quite often, those stories are about some sort of change that is happening. So maybe some additional works, maybe some obstructions somewhere, some changes to the sequence of the works that are being carried out. And that obviously is going to be in time and in space. So they're going to be talking about 3D issues and 4D issues when you add the time aspect to that. Think of a tower block. A tower block is going up in time, and it's also going along in the time span along the timeline as well. An infrastructure project as well, where it's going along a chainage of laying utilities and such like. There's various sequences that have to be applied to that, both in 3 dimensionals and over time as well, which is very difficult to actually get over on a piece of paper. And it's much, much better to actually do that visually. It just lends itself to a visual medium. So I'd like to give you a bit of an example here. And this is something I worked on myself, and it's related to an infrastructure project. And if I give you a bit of background, it was relative to the utility services, so fire water, potable water, storm drainage, foul drainage, that was going along by the side of a metro system. And certain changes were introduced into that. And I'm sure I'm not explaining it very well, even with my words, but can you imagine that as text? So this is the text to try and describe the process that the contractor had originally envisaged for carrying out these particular works. And then why that process changed, how the sequence changed, and how that was a problem to the contractor.
Sean, there is some kind of echo here. I don't know what's echoing.
Is it maybe that somebody has their microphone on? If everybody's muted, it should be okay. It seems like everybody's muted, so. Okay. Sandro says he doesn't hear an echo, so yeah. Okay, I'll carry on then, Aldo. So here we see the text that went into the claim. But I wasn't really satisfied with that because I thought that it needed something to actually bolster it up. So the next best thing then was to actually add some illustration to the claim. So what I did then was to try and almost flowchart it, but in a visual way, in a graphical way, to show what the original process was. So as you can see there, we have going from 1 up to 6 to show the original process of the works. And then couple that then to the actual sequence of the works to show that it was a much more complex, much more involved situation. But again, I found myself actually looking at that and saying to myself, well, I need to trace my finger over that to see how it looks and to how it's going and to why it's a problem. So the next logical thing to do with that was to use my old friend PowerPoint. So in an animation in PowerPoint, the original sequence, and then the as-built sequence, showing the more complexity and the way that these things moved around over the section. So you kind of got an idea, if you're an engineering background or a construction background, you can kind of visualize that a little bit better, almost in 3D, but it's still 2-dimensional. So what was the next thing to do? Well, obviously I'm here to talk about movies. So what did we do? We made a movie.
First, survey and trial pits were made for each activity, which was then followed by drainage work. Once completed, street lighting were to be installed before curbing and irrigation network. Finally, paving and roadwork were to be laid to complete the works. However, these phases took much longer to execute due to the addition of new works, in particular the house connections, increased scope and obstructions to the works. It is stressed that the sequence of works planned cannot be broken, therefore the delays impacted sequentially, not concurrently.
So as you can see there, that was actually shown to the employer. The employer prior to that had said, well, what is the problem? We're just adding in a few little pieces here and there. What is the problem? But when we showed the actual movie to the guy, he suddenly realized, oh yeah, okay, yes, this is a problem because we have these house connections going in, they're every 12 meters. There's not this flow of work there. There's the problems with getting in the access. It's not as easy as it looks from the cross section. And so it was quite an eye opener that wouldn't really come across in the two-dimensional documentation that had been provided previously. Now that's why movies are very good, because you can see there that they show the 3 dimensions. They show the 4th dimension as well, the time. And they're good for things such as sequencing, timings, and locations. So in this particular example, it's a still from another film that we've done, from another movie that we've done. You can see that we hone in on a particular area within a site. We also show where that area is in relation to the whole of the site. And then we have the timeline showing the various problems and the various delays that have been experienced on that site. There's a lot of information there that, because it's visual and because it's shown to you in that particular way, it's much easier than trying to decipher that from the stale kind of textual document of a normal claim document. I'm also going to show you another movie now.
In the original design, the open formwork shutters for the core walls are lifted by a self-climbing system from the previous floor, which had a 2-day planned duration. The rebar works commences on the 2nd day, which were to be prefabricated on site and then lifted into place, installed and inspected by the engineer over a duration of 3 days. The formwork is closed and inspected between the 5th and 6th day, and the concrete was to be poured on the 6th day. In the revised design, concrete pouring can only take place 12 days beyond the original duration due to the new constructability complications and additional work that has surfaced as a consequence of the design changes. Now we will illustrate how and where the additional 12 days are being consumed due to the revised design. Because of the new tapered walls being built simultaneously with the core walls, the formwork for the tapered walls are required to be lifted by a tower crane before lifting the self-climbing system. Due to the constructability challenges faced with constructing the tapered and core walls simultaneously, opening and lifting the climbing system requires an additional 1 day. The rebar not affected by the additional structural steel commences and is installed in locations free of clashes. In parallel, additional steel structures, introduced in the revised design, have to be lifted into place by the tower crane. The crane has to hold each structure while workers fix sufficient bolts using guidance plates to secure it in place, which takes 10 hours for each steel structure. Once installed, the positioning of the steel structure will be surveyed by the contractor, followed by modifications of the alignment, which takes 30 hours.
So what you can see there is a lot of the things that I was talking about previously. So you can see there about sequences. You can see about the changes in sequences because you have the comparison on left to right from the original to the revised design. You can also see in the middle there that you have a gauge of how long it takes. So in number of days it will take for each sequence. And then finally, you have the additions of videos, which are actual videos from the site that show the actual conditions that were working, how things were done, and still shots for that. So it's a whole visual extravaganza, basically, to explain the problems as to why something is completely different from how it was originally, and the problems that the contractor was suffering. So you can imagine that in just a very short piece of time there, you have got a lot of information that has been portrayed and shown to the employer, as opposed to having to wade through documentation and maybe even sketch things out yourself to understand how things were coming about. Okay, so that's why a movie is a good idea. But can people please mute? Thank you. So in that case, what is needed then to make a movie? Well, the first thing we need to know is we need to know what your claim is, basically. So we'll need to know what a brief précis of the claim. What is it about? Is it about disruption? Is it about delays? Is it about change in sequencing? Is it about changes in the works, the scope of works, or things such as that? Because 3D might be the way to go, then we'll be needing things like BIM models. I mean, I say most projects these days have got BIM models, and they're done on BIM, so they should be readily available. We'll need things such as we showed in that one there, the progress photos and progress videos. Very often people make that. Aerial photographs are very common these days, and satellite photographs too, to show the progress of works over time. Of course, documentation, if we need certain documents during the movie, such as letters, emails, and such like that are pertinent to the claim, then we'll need those as well. And my personal favorite is charts and tables, because we can make them look very good on film. So that's kind of why you need a movie and what you need to fuel a movie. But what is the actual process of making the movie? Well, it's not dissimilar to the process in Hollywood, to be honest with you, although it's slightly less glamorous. There's not the same premieres and such like, and there's not as much champagne floating around. But it's basically a 7-stage process. So the first and most important part is the voiceover script and direction, as it would be in any movie. Following that, we will then optimize the BIM models. We then will collect the material to fuel the movie, at which point we'll start making the animatic previews, which I'll explain a bit later. That is where one has to manage the client's expectation. We will then have the animations, graphics, texturing, and lighting, so the lighting rigs and the various camera positions. And then we will do the rendering, which will make it look all glossy and nice. And finally, we will end with the post-production, which will lead to the movie in your hand. So if we take each of those separately now, so what about the first one, which is arguably, well, not even arguably, it is the most important part of the whole movie, which is the voiceover script. Now, if you can imagine Quentin Tarantino or Steven Spielberg going onto site and saying, okay, guys, let's make a movie. What's it about? Oh, it's about some stuff. Oh, what are we going to do? Well, I don't really know, but yeah, we'll just riff with it and see what happens. It is not going to work. So it's the same here. You need to have a good, strong voiceover script. You need to know what the direction of the movie is going to be. And some things to remember with a voiceover script: if you're familiar with claim writing, it's a different discipline, because the voiceover script is designed to be read out loud. So it's designed for somebody to actually narrate. It's not there to be read as a document, i.e., it's not there to look at read in your head. It's there to actually announce. What will happen, as with anything done by committee, is it will generally, well, no, it will always go through numerous revisions. The first revision of the script is never the one that you end up with. And an important thing to remember as well, that once the script has been signed off, then it can't change. Or at least it can change, but it will cause problems. Now, the reason for that is because all of the animatics, as you can imagine, are going to be timed to that script. If not, it's going to end up like one of these 1970s or 1980s dubbed kung fu movies where the lips say one thing and the actual voiceover says something different. It just won't work. And the voiceover as well, we have a professional voiceover, so if that needed to be changed, then obviously that would cost time and money. So what about the script itself? Well, that's an example of a script there, and it's, pardon the pun, very prescriptive. So what we have there is a set style and format, because as a 16.5 centimeter line, that font, that will roughly work out to 6 seconds of voiceover. And the target that we're looking for, the sweet spot, is around about 10 minutes. So somewhere in the region of 10 to 12, 15 minutes. Because as I said before, the attention span of an adult these days is only 8.24 seconds. So you have to be keeping people's attention. And coupled with that, you must be using visual language, which I'll explain a bit later. And as I explained before, the script will be revised. It will go through a lot of revisions before it actually becomes the full-blown final script. Now, just to prove that, this is a little study I did myself on one of the last movies that we did. And we can see there that the running time of the script changed quite considerably from the initial script through to the initial meeting. And I don't know if we've got any lawyers online here at the moment, but there was heavy involvement from lawyers. So whenever we had a meeting with the lawyers, the script invariably got more wordy. However, you can see there from a running time of just over 12 minutes, it eventually ended up with around about 13 to 14 minutes, which was adequate for the job. So I mentioned previously that the language has to be slightly different to that which you would write. So what I have here is a usual kind of paragraph that you'd see in a normal claim document. And using the script and the format that we usually use for that comes out to around about 48 seconds. Not a lot, people might think, but remember, 8.25 seconds of attention span for the average adult. We want to be making it as short as possible as we can. Now, there's a number of things in there that I said before, that the voiceover script is designed to be read out loud, not necessarily to be read. So you can read that and it's fine, and you've got it in your head, you read it in a particular way, but that's not going to work as a script, because what you need to do is there are many things in there that just don't scan properly as a script for voiceover, because firstly, it's very long. Secondly, it's got very complex numbers and words in there. For instance, if you have there, as it reads there, Qatari riyals of 0.974 billion, it's not going to work as a voiceover script. It's going to make it too long. It's going to make it unintelligible. Whereas what we need to do is we need to be cutting that down. We need to be making it to, as I put there, under or approximately 1 billion Qatar riyals. It also is better if it's more punchy or punchier. So that's where bullet points are good to put in there as well. And just to make the whole thing more punchy, so that it gets the message across a lot quicker and can time in with the visuals on the screen. So that knocked off about 42 That came to 42 seconds. So we're knocking off about 6 seconds on there, which you might say to yourself, 6 seconds, that's not even as short as an average adult's attention span of 8.25 seconds. But imagine if you've got 10 of those paragraphs, you're already coming to a minute of running time, which would be 10% of the ideal time for the movie. So it does make sense to get out the scalpel and remove the unnecessary fat from the paragraphs. Other things that we have to think about as well, because we said think about the visuals, think about the voiceover artist and reading out loud. So avoiding things like stumbling words. So, I mean, this can be very difficult even for myself as an English native speaker, but the things that they thought, it just doesn't scan very well. It's stumbling words. It's best avoided. Other things that I mentioned as well is, slightly previously, avoiding long numbers. Can you imagine? It's hard enough to actually say that now without having to listen to that. It's probably take you several seconds to actually say that number. It's better to say approximately 2 million reals. The other thing to do as well is to avoid complex sentences, because when they're being said in the voiceover, you'll get lost in them, even though you have the visuals on screen. And so in this particular case, condense the message down to the bare minimum to get the message across. Other things we have to look at as well is things such as acronyms. So for instance, there, value engineering, VE. Is it worth actually putting it in as an acronym? Because if you're writing it, it's fine. You just bracket it. You put value engineering, brackets, VE. Bear in mind as well, useful tip, that as a voiceover artist will not actually voice anything that is in brackets. If you want to have something said almost as an aside, then you have to use commas instead. So something else that you have to be aware of when a script is being written. I mentioned before to be visual too. So you want to be introducing the things that you will show on screen in the script early. So things like dates. If you want a date to be on a timeline, you have to mention it early within your sentence, early within your script, so that it will stay on screen for the longest time. The same with a subject or sums that are going to be brought up, because you don't want to be bringing it up late in the sentence if you've already brought it up on screen. So it needs to be timed to that. So you need to be bringing these things up early in the script so that they can be for the maximum time on screen. My personal hate is screen text and bullet points. Keep the screen text to an absolute minimum, because you're trying to be visual. So it's just like short bullets of things. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. A PowerPoint, that's a pet peeve of mine as well. PowerPoint presentations, which are basically extracts of a book. It should be absolutely down to the minimum of text to get the message across and let the visuals do the work for them. And bearing in mind as well that 8.25 seconds is the average attention span of an average adult. Something new should happen every 10 seconds, even if it's just a shift of a document on the screen. So, okay, that's the kind of job that I'll be doing, making the script, but what will the client be doing? Well, basically, you can't make a script, you can't make a movie without client involvement. So we need to know the story. We need to have the client heavily involved. So we have workshops, and ultimately, and hopefully, we will get the client to sign off the script as well. And these sort of things take up to, I've been in meetings which have taken up to about 4 hours, but they are useful. And you can imagine, everybody likes to have input. So script by committee can be quite trying, but also quite interesting. And a lot of good ideas can be thrown around the table that way. Okay, so that's the script. I spent a long time on that because the script is so important. It is the absolute backbone of the movie. And without a good script, you have nothing. So the next thing we do is, as I say, the optimization of the BIM models. And hopefully there's a little bit of an extract of a BIM model there. So what do we do with those? Well, it's the importation, cleaning, and optimizing. And again, you need to have that script there because, as you're probably all aware, the BIM models are very heavy, massive numbers of layers, notes, 3D data, and such type. It take a huge length of time to clean and optimize. So if the script can hone down to what particular models are needed and the minimum of what needs to be shown, that can save a huge amount of time and effort to actually get the movie going a lot quicker. And what is the client involvement that's needed in that? Well, obviously, we don't know the way around the models. So a BIM and a CAD manager need to sit down with us and guide us around what is good and what is good to show on the movies. And but I will also say, if there is no BIM model, then don't despair, because the movie that I showed you for the Metro was actually done unbelievably from a cross-section in PDF. So we can do marvelous things. So what next then? Well, I talked about reference material. What sort of things do you need? Well, obviously, we need to think visually. So that's what I've been talking about. This is what my mantra is. It's all about think visual, show, demonstrate, use the graphics. That's my personal mantra. So the sort of reference materials we're looking at are things such as, it says on there, programs. If it's about extension of time, then extracts of the program showing delay events, these sort of things. Photographs, videos that will actually demonstrate, bring a bit of context, bring a bit of reality to the presentation. Logos of the various parties and the tables and charts, because obviously if you're dealing with numbers and figures and maybe productivity over time and such like to demonstrate these things, then we need to have the histograms, the S curves and such like, and we can do marvelous things with animating those as well, which bring them out of the 2D of the page and actually give some sort of context and some sort of life to these sort of things that they deserve. Now, what would be the client involvement in that? Well, basically a lot, because we usually bring like Santa's wish list to the client of the things that we want to show and the things that we want to use to get them on screen. Which brings us then naturally to the animatic previews. Now, I said that this is where expectations may be an issue, because you all saw the movie to start with, and that looks fantastic. That looks really good. But the animatic preview is not quite the same as that. So the animatic preview will have a dummy voiceover. The visuals will not be as refined as you can see there. But the good thing about that is it means that it can allow changes to be made quite easily and quite quickly. So let me show you an example of an animatic preview from the same job where we saw the movie.
First, survey and trial pits were made for each activity, which was then followed by drainage work. Once completed, street lighting were to be installed before curbing and irrigation network. Finally, paving and road work were to be laid to complete the works.
So as you can see there, it was quite a difference indeed. But the good thing about it is that, as I say, it's a first animatic preview. It shows you the kind of concept that we have, and it allows changes to be made. For instance, the engineers amongst us will all see that in the animatic preview, the stormwater drainage was incorrect because bless them, as I said, it was done from a PDF model, a PDF cross-section, and the drainage was showing the actual backfill to the drains, and that looked like it would be an open culvert. from the cross section, but in fact it's not. So that was an error that was made there with regard to the interpretation of what that cross section said. But it's easy to remedy. It's not a problem at the animatic preview stage. And so that is what it's for. It's a rough out, and it gets the rough timing, the rough visuals to inform then what it will become, which is, as we can see on the right-hand side. So what does the client need to do with that? Well, again, we need workshops to work with the client, to see that everything is logical, to see that the sequences are correct, to see that the flow of the work is correct, that we're actually showing what is true. Because at the end of the day, we're not there to make fantasy. We'll leave that to Walt Disney. We're there to show facts, and we're to portray the facts in a visual way, and we have to be accurate with those facts. We're not going to fabricate anything. And again, we'll be doing that either in web calls or in face-to-face, and they can take 3 to 4 hours sometimes if it's a long and in-depth movie. But then once that's signed off, we can then start to get onto the animation proper, and that will be the next phase there. And here we go. So the 3D animations and the 2D graphics will be refined here, and we'll start to put in textures and such like. So as you can see there, we have the 3D cameras, the angles there. We put in the 3D objects. So in that particular case, the overhead metro line there. We put in things such as equipment to give a sense of scale. So we have the cars there, we have the plant on the left-hand side, the excavators, the tippers and such like. We can put in things such as 3D characters, such as such as workers, not necessarily in moving, because that would take a huge amount of time and power to do that. But it gives a sense of scale as to what things are, especially if we're doing an internal video. So something like I don't know, like maybe a hospital or an office block or something, gives a sense of scale to it. And what we'll also do is put in the 2D graphics at the same sort of time. So like the photos, the charts, the documentation and such like that is needed there, as we said before. And even the photos and the videos that we can put in there to give to show the realism of the facts that are what was happening on site. So once that's done, we can then come to the rendering. And this is basically it's not that exciting. It's basically the computers going on overnight, and after the preview is signed off and the 3D animation, 2D graphics are all signed off, then we can start to do the rendering to make it look realistic, to make it look clear, and get the colors all working and such like, as that particular still shot there shows. And then following that, what happens then? Well, then we get the post-production. So at the post-production there, we'll have the final edit of the movie. That's when we get the professional silky tones of the professional voiceover. We'll get the colors looking consistent and the look and feel looking good. And then the final movies for the techie people amongst us will be in the particular HD format and delivered as MP4, which will basically play on any Windows or Apple, and can be scrolled back and forwards, paused, sped up, stopped, everything you wish to do. And we can also embed them in any, well, as you saw there, any PowerPoint and such like. Very, very easy to use. Okay, so that's the basic process then, but how long does that take? Because as we all know, the last James Bond movie took forever, and that's not really acceptable for a clay movie because people need some money. Well, a basic voiceover script and direction is going to take roughly about 2 weeks, depending obviously on the complexity of the script and whether agreement can be reached fairly early on as to the final running of the script. The rest of the process will generally take about 5 weeks. So we're talking roughly about 7 weeks for a movie from the initial kickoff meeting to getting the movie in hand. Now, as you're well aware, I'm in Qatar, so a lot of things we do here need to be translated into another language, and in particular into Arabic. I'm fairly sure that all you guys in South America will not need Arabic translations, but however, this is kind of interesting because it shows cultural differences and language differences. An Arabic translation will roughly be around about 80% longer than the English. And conversely, if an American voiceover is used, it'll be roughly 20% quicker than a British English or English voiceover. And one of the reasons for that is that numbers when pronounced in Arabic are considerably longer than those in English, which is another reason why we try to keep numbers down to a bare minimum and down to the least number of digits that we can. We also need to do things such as screen text translation, and because of the way that the language works, being read from right to left, any comparison that has been made would be made from right to left as well. And of course, the movie needs to be timed to the voiceover to avoid that 1970s, 80s kung fu movie dubbing type of embarrassment. So, okay, that's basically what I have to say about making movies. But just very briefly, for those of you who don't know what Quantum do, basically we're a dispute and contract dispute resolution and contracts management company, and we have a presence pretty much everywhere in the world, although I am based in Qatar as our head office. So what I'd like to do now is that is enough from me, and I think we're almost bang on the hour. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Yes,
and likewise, if anybody wants to write me afterwards, if they think of something later, my email is on there as well. I'd be more than happy to answer there as well.
Excellent. We have a few questions here, Sean. It's very illustrative and very interesting. I personally enjoyed watching the movie. One is by Marcio Barroso. What tools do you use to produce the movie? Okay.
As I said there, that I'm basically the script man and directions man. The actual tools that we use for that, I would have to talk to. I need to talk to our technical boys who are very, very talented animators and graphic artists as to what they actually use for that. So I wouldn't want to lie to you there. I cannot tell you that.
I have a second question here by Douglas Heskey. Do you use this approach to go through all the issues raised in a claim, or just the main issues?
Right. What we do is, well, basically the client is king. So it's whatever the client wishes to put in his movie, then we will put in the movie. However, having said that, some things lend themselves better to a visual medium. So things such as like a lack of payment or something is probably not going to work so well on screen as, let's say, a disruption claim. So if the client is having difficulty coming to terms with a disruption claim, then that is an absolutely ideal thing for putting on the movie. Likewise, if delays are caused by sequence changes, such as obstructions, these sort of things, ideal for a movie. So what we would try to do is we would sit down initially at the initial script meeting to say to the client, okay, what would you like in your movie? What is the issue that you feel is you want to get across? And if it is that it's disruption, then we'll talk about disruption. We'll talk about how we can put it in there. If it's just about, okay, I've got all these issues that I want to put in there. Excuse me. Remember, there's only about 10 to 15 minutes to actually get everything there. So if we're just going to put a list of like, oh, I've got this problem, that problem, da 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 da, you're probably better off using a PowerPoint, to be perfectly honest with you. We want to help you to get across the things that people have difficulty in grasping. So the things that come across better visually. So as I say, things like disruptions, things like delays due to changes of sequences, differences in a scope of works, changes from an IFC, from a tender, these sort of things that are much better explored visually.
Okay, I have another question here. In most cases, the party doesn't have enough technical information to reconstruct the 3D model of the execution. How do you do in such cases?
As I said, the one movie there that we showed, the one for the Metro, was actually done from a cross section in PDF. So it can we take stuff from like Revit models and the like. We can also take stuff from the PDFs and AutoCAD. It doesn't necessarily have to be the BIM model and such like that we use. We can take anything and do the best with that. So don't worry if people don't have a full, I don't know, 300 LOD BIM model. We can do something with it. It's not a big issue. I mean, it'll take more time, obviously, but
all right. Let me see if we have another question here. We have an invitation for you to attend the annual meeting of the AACE Brazil section, which will be held in March in São Paulo, here in Brazil. And I would like to thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I'm sure that everybody who was attending now and who will watch later found it very inspiring. That's the best word. And thanks very much for attending, for accepting our invitation for our AACE connection. And if you have any question, if you want to say something in the final considerations, the word is yours. The word is yours.
I'd just like to say thank you very much, Aldo, for allowing me to present. It's something I feel very passionate about, because I feel that claims are very, very often limited by the written word. And I feel very passionate about making them more accessible, because a lot of times people have very deserving claims, but they just cannot communicate them. And I think this is a really good tool to allow that communication, to allow a good claim to go forwards.
And many times it's written by lawyers.
I don't know how many lawyers we have on the stream, but oftentimes, yeah, if the claim is not written by a lawyer, then it's written by somebody who's pretending to be a lawyer by using lawyerly language, and it does seem to be very inaccessible. I started off by just putting lots of pictures and graphics into claims, which kind of goes halfway there, but I think the limiting factor is that you can only ever be two-dimensional with that, whereas the movie allows you 3 and 4 dimensions.
All right. Well, thank you very much again. Send my regards to Lucia, your
No
wife,
problem. Thank you.
who is very active within AACE globally. And I would like to say thank you to all the attendees, and to say that if you want one of our members to deliver a presentation to AACE Qatar section or any other association, you are free to consult us, and we can assign very good presenters too. Thank you very much. Have a good day or evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.